The word autonomy is becoming increasingly prevalent in our daily language, but what does it really mean? From a developmental psychology perspective, autonomy is the process by which an individual becomes a self-governing person who can regulate his or her own behaviors. Autonomy development is a central task in adolescence and is important to youth adjustment as it reflects growing social, emotional, and cognitive maturity of the adolescent. Dependence, or the lack of autonomy, is becoming more and more common in popular media due to portrayals and concerns over helicopter parents. But what happens when youth are not able to become autonomous? Before we can answer this question, it's important to know how dependence develops across adolescence from both parents and peers because they're two of the most dominant relationships that teenagers have. Study 1 of my master's thesis used archival longitudinal data and examined the developmental trajectories of parent and peer dependence for students in grades 5 through 12. Analyses identified two main groups of youth who follow different developmental trajectories for each type of relationship. In this graph, we see the level of dependence on parents. The dotted blue line shows us that most youth have low levels of dependence on their parents. These students reported that they often felt capable, independent, and autonomous from their parents. Although the youth in the solid blue line had higher levels of dependence, in general, as youth became older, they became less dependent on their parents. This graph shows the level of dependence on peers. The dotted red line shows us that again, most youth have low levels of dependence on peers. So these students reported perceiving little or no conformity to their same-age classmates. A smaller group of youth followed an inverted U-shaped curve of peer dependence. It's possible that this high peer dependence trajectory represents a more vulnerable group of adolescents who are more emotionally or instrumentally dependent on their peers. Through a joint trajectory analysis, I also examined the overlap of parent and peer dependence groups and found that the majority of youth reported being relatively autonomous from both their parents and peers. So what does this all mean? First, there are distinct groups of youth who are either high or low on both parent and peer dependence. This finding contributes to the literature by identifying subgroups of youth who follow distinct patterns of development and highlighting the variation in autonomy development across individuals. Second, this study highlights that most youth are able to develop autonomy, and this is important because autonomy development has been linked with positive outcomes in adolescence. Finally, the study provides unique insight into the relative importance of parent and peer influences. So, despite some of our concerns that peer relationships supersede parent relationships, this doesn't seem to be the case. This study suggests that autonomy from parents and peers are important and continue to develop across adolescence. Understanding the psychosocial outcomes associated with joint parent and peer trajectories of dependence is an important next step in the research to help promote healthy relationships.